Hello everybody, and thank you very much for tearing yourself off the streets and away from a sunny day. We haven't had a lot of them around. My name's Joan Concannon. I'm the director of York Festival of Ideas, and it's my enormous pleasure not only to welcome you to our first day of an action-packed 14 days, but also to welcome the fabulous Isabel Berwick from the Financial Times. So thank you very much. I have to put my glasses on now. This is a really interesting, I had a day at the cricket and I know nothing about cricket, and so I gulped down Isabel's fabulous book, and I can heartily recommend it. So what we're going to do is have a conversation for about 30-35 minutes. We'll see how we go, and then we'll have it very interactive, lots of questions, lots of observations from all of you around the experiences that you've had. But we're so lucky to have one of the world leading experts on work and careers. Isabel runs she edits the work and careers pages for the Financial Times, is the host of the Financial Times Working It, a podcast, which sounds very cool. And she is so well equipped to think about the really changing dynamic of work in a post-COVID world. So the book is very practical. It's got lots of tips and hints, but it's also very, very interesting on that changing cultural piece. So Isabel, you've had a long career in journalism, and over the past 5 years, you've edited the Working Careers pages. So tell us really about what kicked off the instigation for the book and bringing together all of that experience that you've kind of amassed over your journalistic career.
Yeah, so I don't edit the pages anymore.
Oh, shoot, sorry.
No, I've managed to turn my side hustle into my actual hustle, so that's been a win for everybody. So don't give up on your side hustle, folks. And so the evolution of the book came really with a direct message to me on Twitter from an editor at HarperCollins. He said, "I really like your podcast. Would you like to write a book?" I messaged back, "Yes, I would." And I sorted out a book deal, but actually what she was looking for was, what she saw as a gap in the market was a book that is really for people who don't read books about work and careers and management. You know, I get sent 10, 20 books a week on management, leadership, all of that stuff. They're mostly pitched at the kind of MBA level or CEO or C-suite level, but actually for most of us, what do we want from work? We want it to fit in with our lives. We want it to be long-term, we don't want to burn out, we want to get a pay rise when we ask for one, and we want to learn how to get on with our colleagues. And these are not big asks, but they are quite hard. It's quite hard to find books that are really about that. You know, it's almost as if it's a dirty word to say that you don't want to be the CEO in a lot of that kind of management publishing. I never wanted to be the CEO. I wanted to have a fun and interesting career with amazing colleagues, and I've had that, and now I've got this kind of extraordinary late career pivot, sort of rather in a kind of meta way, looking at work and how we work, and that's really changing. And so I think another reason for the book now is that we're at this extraordinary moment, and perhaps we could probably talk about that all day.
In a university world, I certainly have zero desire to be a vice-chancellor. I think it's an interesting job at the moment. So that segues actually into that observation around the changing nature of work and the way that you've described the sort of squidgy, I really like the visceral nature of the word squidgy part of work right now, and the kind of unformed, evolving nature of work, and how that is really thinking about that intergeneration, the trajectory of careers, from young people entering into a labour market, right through to people suddenly, that great exit post-COVID, suddenly thinking, what the hell is this for? I want to do something completely different. So talk to me about how the book kind of tackles and explores that squidgy nature of work.
Yeah, I mean, I hope the book doesn't date that much, but the way we work at the moment is that everything's been thrown up in the air. So before COVID, most of us with corporate organisational jobs went into the office however many days a week, 9 to 5 or however long, and we just never thought about that. But that's a hangover from Victorian times. You know, the clocking in, clocking out. Even if we didn't clock in and clock out, we did in our minds, and we carried that guilt if we didn't sit on the chair for 8 or 9 hours a day. And so I think COVID has allowed us to chuck an element of that, but we don't know what we've got instead. So the tension in work is not so much, I think, now this kind of return to office that we keep reading about, CEOs demanding people come back to the office versus work from home. The tension is more around how we work in terms of are we working at the same time as our colleagues, or are we doing what we call asynchronous work, so we do it when it suits us. And tech has enabled that enormously. And it is a huge liberation, for example, for parents, for people with caring responsibilities, for people who may not be able to be or want to be in the office all the time. But I think there's sort of the liberating power of asynchronous work and the tech that enables it hasn't really been harnessed yet. So there's that going on over there. But the headline thing is, do we want to be in the office? Do we want to be at home? And that, a lot of that is intergenerational. Because a lot of older people, they want younger people to be in the office, but they don't particularly want to be in the office themselves all the time. So there's a kind of, they've got a lovely house somewhere, they've got a home office. Their younger staff might be living in shared houses, particularly in London where I live, where the housing situation is terrible. So that hasn't really been resolved. And when I say squidgy, I think different organisations are figuring it out. And so for people going into the workforce now, I would say really find out what is the practice, because what they say on their website might be very different from what's happening. And I hear a lot of evidence that individual managers are making things flexible for their teams, even when there might be someone in charge saying you've all got to be here 3, 4, 5 days a week.
It is interesting that whole thing around people's different attitudes to being there, the kind of presenteeism, as opposed to the outcome of what you would want your staff to be able to do. And it does seem to be senior leaders in particular industries, financial services, for instance, have been very vocal. You have to be in the office, you have to be in the office for about 17 hours a day. We're not happy if you're doing your work, but we're not, we haven't got our eagle eye on you. But having said that, I think back to my early part of my career, I learned as much from watching more senior people in the organisation do things and present things and position things in a way. So it is, exactly as you say, it is very, very squidgy. It backs into the idea, though, of a changing nature of what people want out of their careers and the definitions or the evolution of workplace ambition, which you do talk about in the book. Tell us a bit more about where you think that changing nature of ambition lies.
Yeah, so before the pandemic, or certainly when I started my career, and probably right up to the pandemic, if we said ambition, we probably thought about it in terms of work, our professional selves. But I think now the definition is much broader. It takes in what our ambitions are for our personal lives, for the things that we do outside work. What is our ambition in our, one wild and precious life, as the saying goes? And I think that broadening out of ambition has been really exciting, because it allows you to say, this is what I want from my work. And your ambition at work might be to pick your kids up from school 2 days a week. Okay, so actually that was my ambition, although I was never allowed to say it. And so I just did it. And actually it was seen as a lack of ambition at the time, because if you weren't in the office 5 days a week, 10 hours a day, you weren't ambitious. Now, you could say that's my ambition. I love my job, I enjoy it, I enjoy managing a team, but I would like to pick my kids up from school 2 days a week. That's my ambition, or to be more rooted in my community. And I think the pandemic gave that back to us, that idea of work being over here, but also part of our lives in a way that is complementary rather than antagonistic, if I can say that. And I think if we can think about ambition as a whole, that really is a huge change from before the pandemic.
So part of the enablement of all of this flexibility and hybridity is technology. And we wax and wane between robots taking our jobs on the one hand, to the idea that technology enables that bigger level of fluidity in terms of our working lives versus our home lives versus anything else that we do. How much do we need to worry or be excited about where technology is taking us in terms of the workplace?
Both. Worried and excited. So I recorded a podcast this week with the FT's AI editor, Madhumita Murgia. And she said the next year is going to be crucial for AI. So if there are people here or watching this who are entering the workforce, this year is the year for AI. And where it's going to make a massive difference in knowledge work and creative work, is early stage careers. So a lot of the stuff that people were doing in the first 2 years of their career, you might have been tasked with admin, you might have been tasked with learning on the job, you might have been tasked with processing. That's all gone. AI is going to help us. You're going to have to learn how to sort the AI out. So Microsoft calls its AI Copilot, and that's, I think, an ideal iteration of what we mean by generative AI in work. It works with you. But certainly for early careers, they're going to be absolutely transformed. So the kind of early career that anybody who's probably over 25 has had is not going to be the same as anyone who's entering the workforce now. I don't think the impact of that has really been thought about. And for everyone, I think AI is going to, obviously AI is going to take some jobs. We don't know how many, we don't know where. What I hang on to when I talk to people who are in this arena, and I'm not particularly, and I'm really trying hard to use AI to allow Google to summarize emails, to allow Google to summarize meetings. We have to allow it into our lives a little bit to see what it can do. But I do think the potential of it is extraordinary. And I think it could, in the best case scenario, and I am a bit of a techno-optimist, in the best case scenario, it will liberate us to be more human at work. And I realise this has been said loads of times before. We were all supposed to be working 15 hours a week, Keynes said, and we're not, clearly. So every time tech has been introduced, we just work more. So the downside of AI might be that we all just work more. But the upside of it is that it liberates us to have more human connection. So if you're in a client-facing job, for example, you might have more time for your clients. You might be a better account handler or client manager. You might be a better manager. You might be a better family member. And I cling on to that. But I think the big picture is going to be clearer in about 12 to 18 months when all of the Google, Microsoft, Zoom, AI tools that have recently been introduced have really been embedded.
You heard it here first, the York Festival of Ideas. Let's take a straw poll, because we've got a really good mix of ages in the audience. Are you scared or excited? So let's do scared of AI in the context of your work first. Hands up.
I'm scared and...
Yeah, I always want the middle ground.
Yeah.
But equally, does that mean the rest of you are really excited, or you're sitting on the fence and waiting for the end of the year?
Some excitement. Some sitting on the fence.
Yeah. So... I really loved your assertion that it was a paraphrasing of Philip Larkin, but I won't name the Philip Larkin poem, of all workplaces are dysfunctional. So give us your advice, and your brilliant articulation of this is investigating whether your workplace sucks or shines. What's the secret sauce in identifying what are the factors that make it one thing or the other?
Well, to give away what's in my book, the short answer is it comes from the top. So if you are thinking of taking a job, if you're in a job application process, look at the leadership of that organisation. Are those leaders modelling the kind of behaviour that you would like to work with or for? So one of the huge issues in organisations that is you won't find on LinkedIn, or you might find it on Glassdoor if you read reviews, you might find it if you talk to people. But one of the hidden things about dysfunctional organisations is that everyone really follows the lead of the leader. And if they are working 15, 18-hour days, if they are not taking their holiday, if they are imposing workloads that are unsustainable, that filters down. But almost everything in work is to do with the people who are, it's a human business, everything is human. How efficient and thoughtful and effective are the people at the top? And then I suppose a bit further down, when you get a job or when you go into an organisation, how effective or efficient is your manager, and how well are they, managing the team? What kind of work environment is it? I mean, these are very basic things, but actually I think it's quite easy to overlook. And too often we'll go for a new job because it's a bigger salary. But as one of my colleagues said to me, there's no point in getting 20 grand extra if you spend all of that on therapy because you hate your job so much. So, just look at the whole picture, I think, rather than the shiny.
So that's really interesting, because there is also, and your book talks about this, and there's a very interesting labour market report about the state of the labour market in the UK by JISC, which is on Universities UK's website, and it is a really fascinating read about just how many people are in management roles accidentally. that they've been really good at something specialist. So somebody said, right, okay, now that you're so good at that, we'll get you to run a team. But there's no training provided. You have to kind of learn it on the job. And your book talks about these accidental managers. And in the context of lifelong learning, what should we be doing to kind of address that as you know, people who are managers in organizations, but also that kind of awareness of just, it's not everybody's born to this. There needs to be some kind of training and development associated with management.
And nobody's born to it. You know, everyone can learn to be a better manager. And if you're in a position where you've been moved into management and they've offered you no training or support, that says something about the organisation you work for. And I think far too often there isn't, you know, I think 80% of managers in the UK have had no training. I mean, it's really shocking. And the UK is particularly bad. And we could talk about the reasons for that. And I think part of the really core reason for the UK being terrible at management is this very British idea of, you know, the sort of gifted amateur. You know, if we think of Boris Johnson as the kind of epitome of that, you know, the ruling classes in this country have had a go at everything and think they can have a go at everything. And that has sort of filtered down. If you look at the way people talk about management, the way that management is denigrated, the way that when there are redundancies to be had, it is often the managers who are shafted.
Or worse, middle managers.
Middle managers are often
who
shafted.
apparently are sitting all day, you know, with their feet up on the desk smoking a cigar, which is certainly not my experience of middle management.
No, I mean, you know, most middle managers are sort of in this awful sandwich between the senior leadership and the team, and they have to, you know, manage upwards, and they also have to manage the team below them who are probably grumpy and not at all grateful. So, I mean, that's you know, it's such a huge thing, management, and I don't think we've really woken up. So I guess in my book, what I was trying to do was saying, okay, here you are, you've been made a manager, here are some tools that you can deploy even if you're not in the ideal situation. And there's a great amount you can do to educate yourself. You know, ranging from stuff like free stuff on LinkedIn to getting your employer to pay for you to go on a short course. A lot of universities and business schools run short courses that employers can buy. You can buy online courses. I mean, it's not like this stuff isn't out there. Yeah. And if they've put you in the role, they should be paying to train you.
Absolutely. So that leads me then to your very unflinching depiction of toxic managers and the enormous impact that they very often don't realise they're having on people's mental health and well-being. So give us some examples of how to grapple with a bad manager if you're in that situation, because it can be truly catastrophic.
It can be truly catastrophic. And when I talk to friends and, you know, when I talk to people who are in the kind of psychology therapy business, they will tell you that every client that comes to them, quite often, there will be something around a work-related issue there. And it ruins people's lives. You know, that you've probably all known people who've had burnouts from work. But if you ask anyone, are you a toxic manager? How many people are going to say I'm a toxic manager? Nobody. Nobody thinks they're toxic. They think they might be tough. They think they might be kind. They think they might be, you know, we all project this idea of ourselves as good people. And their manager might be a good person, but they're not a good manager. So all you can do, you can't change other people. And it took me such a long time to realise this, both at work and in my personal life. You know, all you can do is change how you react to them. And I think if you're miserable at work, that's the first thing you can do. Take a step back. How can I change how I react? And that's really hard, because if someone is deliberately provoking you or being passag or being snide, our human reaction is to be defensive or to fight back. But actually taking a step back and actually thinking about, what am I bringing to this situation? And we're all bringing this baggage from our past, which I think is now starting to be acknowledged in terms of team dynamics. But if you've had a parent who was, for example, extremely strict, or what you did was never good enough, you might be trapped in a kind of parent-child dynamic with your manager, and you're bringing that to, you know, they might be overbearing, but you're bringing this kind of supplicant. You know, I had a manager like this, and I was trying so hard for years and years to make them think that I was good and to give me praise. And it only dawned on me, rather belatedly, after I'd had a bit of a breakdown, that actually they were never going to praise me, because that was not the relationship we had at all. I was never going to please this person. So the quicker we can accept that we can't do anything, take a step back and actually reflect on our own part in the team dynamics, the easier it is to see if the situation is sustainable or not. Because there are some situations you just have to walk away from.
Yeah, I think when you've exhausted all possibilities, there is, I think it shouldn't be seen as a failure if you decide, actually, I need to find something else, because you spend so much time at work.
You spend so much, and actually, of course, there are exceptions to this. If you're in a job where you're being actually harassed or bullied in a, if you're in a reasonable sized organisation, it'll have an HR department. Now, you may feel ambivalent about the HR department, but honestly, the resources for help are there, and you can take them. So, what I'm talking about is everyday office politics. If there's something much more serious going on, that requires a very different approach.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get back to evolving nature. So communications was very fascinating. And one of Isabel, I was saying to her last night, one of Isabel's slightly throwaway remarks sort of froze my blood, which is the use of emojis. I'm rubbish at, so I almost never do. But generally, the use of different communication tools, but also the rather startling realization that the use of the full stop is not necessarily always appropriate. Explain.
No.
This really freaked me.
Yeah. So I talked to a few digital communication experts, which is a kind of emerging world of experts. And digital communication is so interesting because it is generationally defined. Whatever you think about in, the cohort that you're in, if you're a millennial or a Gen X or a boomer, you may not like those definitions and you may not see yourself in there, but I guarantee you, your digital communication will reflect your age. And in the office, this is huge because Gen Z are coming into the workforce, they are digital natives, they understand how to communicate online, perhaps more fluently sometimes in a workplace than in person, because a lot of these young people have spent 2 years in their bedrooms in COVID, and it's shocking really. But for those of us who are older, we have to really think about, so emoji use differs with age. I use a lot of emojis. I write a newsletter, it's full of emojis. I use them in a Gen X way, I'm unapologetic about it. My children, I only discovered when I was writing this book actually, that when my children would say, I did really well on my French test, and I'd go like this on the thumbs up, and they had thought for all those years I was being ironic and just taking the mick out of them. So this is an ironic sign for Gen Z. So for those of us who are older and trying to encourage our staff to say, yeah, well done team, that's just not going, that's going down like a, anyway.
And then now I'm worried about the thumbs up as well as the full stop.
Yeah, thumbs up is bad. And then the full stop on the end of your text, particularly on text and WhatsApp, no full stop on the end of anything. So if you're, a lot of teams now are in team WhatsApp groups, which has, we could do a whole session on the use of WhatsApp as a side tool when you're on a Zoom meeting. I'm sure you all know what I mean. But they do not put a full stop on the end because it is a passag, it's a sign of a passag or indeed just ag. And I had no idea about this till I talked to this digital expert and I talked to my kids who just went, yeah, of course, yeah, you'd never put that. But I think all of these things are so unspoken in the workplace that we're all blundering around in our own age and thought bubble. So I'm just trying, obviously I keep getting it wrong, but we just have to keep trying, really, don't we?
I think everyone I work with knows I'm a complete technical Luddite, so I hope they forgive me. You talk about workplace friends.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really interesting, the importance of workplace friendships. Talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, I think workplace friends have been really underrated, and I think it took the pandemic for us to really think about the people we work with as friends. Because certainly when I have always had friends at work. It is always a bit, I think partly because of the kind of workplaces I've been in, newspaper and magazine offices are fun places to work, insofar as they exist anymore. They are great. But I think a friend at work, if you have a good friend at work, you are I can't even remember the percentage, you are so much more likely to be engaged and enjoy your work and to stay longer. So it is in managers' interest to encourage friendship. You can't force friendship, and things like, the dreadful organised fun outing, which most of us have been on and perhaps dread. That I don't mean that. I mean building a bit of looseness into the calendar so that you have time to go for a coffee sometimes.
Yeah.
So I had an expert on the show called Linda Grattan, who works at London Business School, who said, I would like to lose 50% of meetings and replace those with coffees with colleagues, because that way you make connection, and some of those connections might be really important. I mean, I talk in the book about, I have a very good friend called Sarah Gordon who worked at the FT. She was senior to me. She left to start a new career. I was so upset that I spent the whole of the next day walking around Highgate Cemetery in the rain, in tears. And it was so overblown. But I mean, that just shows how deep our connections with our work friends can go. And she's still my friend. So, and then every time we write about a friendship in the FT, in the comments underneath, there's all these people going, there's no such thing as friends at work. You know, work should be about work, and you might have to clamber over someone on your way to the top so you can't be too close. And I think that there's something valid at the heart of that, which is that our relationships at work can sometimes be fraught when there are things like promotions or redundancies. And so perhaps we do have to stand a little bit back from our workplace relationships. But honestly, the value and the connection and the love, really, that you can get at work is massively underrated.
I totally agree. God, if I went home and told my husband all the things that I wanted to talk through in a workplace, I think he would have just glazed over years
And
ago.
real love, actually. You know, plenty of people meet their partners at work.
Yes, there's that as well, although I can't speak to that. Let's talk about women in work.
Oh, yeah.
And also intersectionally, equity in terms of pay and that whole morass minefield. So I think we're quite a long way from women feeling like they can have it all. Maybe we just never can, but it is a bit of a minefield. And there is then related to that, the whole, you referenced this in your kind of why the book, how to ask for a pay rise. And is it more difficult? Is there still evidence to suggest that women find that harder?
Yeah,
or is
there
that
is.
a myth? Because I don't think it is.
Yeah, women do find it harder to ask for a pay rise. And there's this great acronym that an academic called Grace Lorden at LSE taught me, which is FOBSAG, fear of being seen as greedy. So women suffer from FOBSAG enormously. It's almost like you feel grateful that you've got a job and you don't want to push it. And to get over this, you have to really think about your pay rise ask as a process, not an event. And I think flipping that in my mind has been really transformational. So you have to prepare for the pay rise ask. You have to know when you're going to do it. You have to have, your bullet points. Do not go in and ramble to your manager. And things like I need or I deserve. So there's a lot of work you can do around getting a pay rise, and there's a lot of work you can do if you don't get the pay rise, that puts you into another space, because mostly we don't get the pay rise. Let's be realistic. But just by asking, you're placing yourself into another space, and you're asserting yourself. And I think it's really important we start to do that. I think things have really changed, and since the pandemic it's changed, actually. I do think people are asking more assertively and more often.
So related to that, I've noticed in the last year or so, and I'm obviously an assiduous reader of the FT, a lot of more negative public discourse from some sector leaders around the whole EDI, equality, diversity, inclusion agendas, and the view that too much money is being spent on creating inclusive environments, which I find interesting. And the book picks up on some of that as well in relation to that kind of culture wars agenda.
Yeah, so I finished writing the book at the end of 2023, and I think things have moved on since then. I think the backlash against EDI or DEI, whatever we want to call it, is real. But I think a lot of that originates in the States. If we think about the Supreme Court decision on university entrance, the Harvard case, which most of you know about, but actually, and how that impacts in corporate life, that's filtering through in the States. I think in the UK, it's slightly different. I went to an event this week. It's the 4th anniversary of George Floyd's murder. I went to an internal event at the FT, and there were panelists there saying that we're still doing the work. The work goes on. Progress is happening because we can measure that a diverse workforce catering to a diverse consumer or client base is what we need. I think my slight worry is that it all started with the business case for diversity, as it did for more women. That was the very first sort of business case argument about 10, 15 years ago. And then it evolved into actually this is what we should be doing actually for ourselves as a society, and to find the greatest pool of talent, we have to look as widely as we can. My slight worry is it's slightly gone back to the business case argument. Now, that's not necessarily a terrible thing because everybody's still working, but they're working more behind the scenes. I think you're right, and I think a lot rides on the election. If Labour get in, they are planning a Race Equity Act. So, and ethnicity pay gaps will have to be published in the same way as gender pay gaps for larger companies. And that is a really clear commitment to movement on diversity. If the Tories get in, I think we know what's going to happen. I think that would be bleak for the wider EDI, DEI movement. I mean, we can argue that it hasn't done brilliantly in some respects in the last 5 years, because if you talk about inclusion, which is a very fashionable word, inclusion means everybody. And there are lots of groups of people who don't feel included, specifically probably white middle-aged men. And actually, I think there's been a mistake made somewhere that because if you're feeling pissed off that you're not included and that other people are getting the breaks, you haven't done your job. We haven't done our job. It's not inclusion. Total. And I think we're just at the very beginning of that discussion in workplaces and beyond, actually.
So I'm going to move to questions, and I'm going to ask one more question, which is the mid-career pivot point, and advice and guidance for somebody who has been in a particular sector or a particular job and wakes up on a wet Monday morning and kind of goes, enough. What's the logical sequence that means you could transition from one thing to another safely? Because it's quite, I can't begin to imagine being not in that space, that how you persuade yourself that you can take that huge leap into the unknown.
It's terrifying. I mean, don't jack your job in. I do I do hear from people who wake up on, they go to France on holiday and come back and like, no, that's it, I'm jacking my job in. No, don't do that. I think once you put the seed in your head, it starts to percolate. So you might have a side hustle you want to start doing. You might have a hobby you want to start doing. I think a lot of companies now are thinking about this transition period, which we might be post-60, it might be post-55, depending on where you work. And a lot of companies are saying you could cut down to 3 days a week, and then you could spend those other 2 days exploring what you might want to do in 5 or 10 years' time. Some are thinking about, and this is an idea that came from Arthur Brooks, who writes for The Atlantic. Some of you might know him. I think he's a wonderful columnist. I really recommend his work if you're in that space thinking about what next or happiness. And he says up to 50, we're in the doing phase of our careers. So we are, earning, reaching the peak of our careers. And after 50, we need to think about giving back. So mentoring, moving to a role in the organisation that is more about bringing on the younger generations and passing on your institutional wisdom. Now, that's a kind of idealised view, but actually I think there is something important there. And the other thing I think not enough people do probably is get a coach. There are a lot of people now who are really quite expert in transition coaching. And coaching is a bit of a lot of people might be a bit wary of it, but I think a coach will work with you to bring out what it is that you want. They won't tell you what to do. A good coach will bring out what is already inside you and help you to kind of crystallize and articulate it. And if you're really lucky, your company will pay for that.
Right, that seems like a good place to stop and hear from all of you and tell us about your experiences and any questions that you want to ask a major time expert on careers and work. So, excellent. We're just getting the microphones.
Look like I mean business.
Hello. I've got 2 questions, to be greedy. First question is, what does the 26-year-old do? So picking up on the 25 as that benchmark for this exciting world of AI, what do you recommend for a 26 or 27-year-old, or is it just too soon and it's too uncharted to identify how they can not get caught out. And I guess saying this as a baby boomer, there was an element of always catching up on technology. So I don't know if that question has been asked of you before.
No, I think my advice to anybody is to be curious and embrace what's offered to you at work, because so many of us just go to work and keep our heads down. And in fact, by talking to colleagues and engaging, and in fact, for somebody who's 26 at the start of their, relative start of their career probably, that's, you know, get a mentor is my general advice to people. And it might be an internal mentor, it might be someone you've met in your wider network. I mean, this is something that just didn't exist probably when you and I started work, Joan. It's extraordinary, the power of having someone. I mean, you could also just call it an advocate. If it's internal, it can be someone more senior who's just going to tell you how the land lies, a bit off the record. And that's fantastic. So 26-year-olds are going to be able to navigate the new world of AI, no problem. But they've also got a little bit of experience under their belt, and they can harness, you know, even a bit of reverse mentoring, where the younger person mentors the older person in trying to understand a little bit of what the new generation is bringing to work. So there's a two-way, you know, it's not a one-way thing at all. I would love to be 26 now.
So ideally we need an AI mentor. Somebody who has that vision, who can see it and then feed it down.
Yeah, no, you know, all sorts of mentoring.
I think the rise of reverse mentoring is really interesting.
The rise of reverse mentoring is very interesting.
Perhaps if I had a reverse mentor, I'd know more about full stops and their appropriate use, maybe.
The second question I've got is, more in your FD columnist role, are you hearing much appetite from the over 60s and the over 70s who might have been retired, who are thinking, now that the world of work has changed so dramatically, that they might be tempted to go back and do some form of projects? Or is there a horde of people coming at you like that?
Yes, it's huge. Not as huge as it should be, but I'm hearing in fact, we're making a video about this. There's this sort of unretiring cohort are coming back, and I'm here. I heard an example the other week of, I think it was a bank or a financial services company that was sunsetting, as they say, a computer system. They just didn't have the people, and so they brought people back to, you know, shut down this system and migrate it. And I think there's a big rise in people coming back on contracts. And also, if you've already retired, you can come back. I think status is not such a big thing, so you can come back on a kind of freelance or contract basis. And more widely, the idea of the returner at any age is becoming huge. I know that a lot of the professional services companies are investing a lot of money in their alumni networks, because once you've worked somewhere, you're the best advocate for that company wherever you go, and you may come back. And I think a lot of companies have belatedly woken up to it. So I feel really optimistic. I mean, I realise ageism is a massive, massive problem, but I think more people are starting to realise that there's a huge amount of wasted talent.
Thank you. I suppose my question really is about those young people who are just about to engage with university, and that the growing interest in apprenticeships. And really it's looking at whether they should be engaging with work really early, or looking towards the concept of what we used to call liberal education, and enjoy themselves a little bit longer in the world of study.
Joan, would you like to?
We had a very large conversation about this over dinner. You go first, and I'll chip in.
I think this is really fascinating, and I think it really depends on the young person, because I think university still has a massive place for people who want to learn, you know, are curious about something, want to learn just for this pure love of learning. I also think that the lure of the apprenticeship is amazing, especially the paid apprenticeship with a bit of training, you know, the apprenticeship degree that hasn't really taken off massively yet, but maybe it will. So I've got one child is extremely academic, has been to university, has a master's degree, and I have another child who hasn't gone to university and probably won't. And I think within that is that's the situation of many families now. And I didn't push my son to go to university because he wasn't particularly engaged at school. A lot of young people go to university, particularly from, you know, the kind of background that I'm coming from. You know, I'm university educated. I assumed my children would be university educated. It has been very hard for me to let go of that for my son, if I'm honest. And I think for a lot of parents, that's the same. But I have let go of it, and it's liberating, because I think the opportunities now for young people away from university are amazing. But the university has to stay for the young person for whom it will really benefit them. And actually, any arts degree, you know, anyone who says that an arts degree is not worthwhile, that's absolute BS. Any arts degree will get you anywhere. It's such a fantastic, disciplined way of thinking, and employers still love it.
I would absolutely agree. We have a law school at the university, but I can tell you that when legal firms come on, they are as interested in philosophy, history, English, language degree graduates as they are in straightforwardly people coming out of the law school. I think that the challenge at the moment is a public discourse that pits different parts of education provision against each other, rather than thinking in a really strategic way about what is required, not just from an economic point of view, but from a social and cultural point of view. And if you thought about it in that holistic fashion, you wouldn't then, as a leader put out on tweet earlier this week, which I found quite extraordinary, was the bold assertion without any context or nuance that you don't need to go to university to succeed. Well, no one ever said that you didn't. It's just the idea that you can denigrate higher education in this way, as if somehow you dilute the power and value of education if you spread it around and too many people are getting access to it, I find deeply problematic. I mean, I'm clearly biased. I'm passionate for higher education. I come from a family, I am the first person in my family to go to university. It has transformed my life completely. And I just really, I am very, very perturbed at the idea of choking off people's choices and opportunities in such a blunt way. I find that very problematic. And I went to a conference once where somebody effectively said, we just need to get better at separating the sheep from the goats at an earlier stage. And I find that utterly insulting to generations of kids who, at the age of 15 or 16, and their brains are still in development, how on earth do you know what their choices are going to be? How on earth do you know what their talents are? You cannot choke off huge amounts of potential at that point. And I think some of the narratives that pit apprenticeships against degrees really are problematic in fooling people into thinking that they don't have a choice when actually they should and do have choices.
Yeah.
Speech over. So I think you had a question down here.
Hi, yeah. So I was wondering for the sort of future work, if there's a possibility of a sort of a return to a more unionized workforce, because I work in an industry that's very abusive, quite sort of aggressive. It pits a lot of people against each other, and it's sort of, there's no incentive to sort of train people up, and you're sort of, a lot of people coming in are sort of lined up in front of the firing squad. And there sort of seems to be no incentive to sort of train people, or there's not much sort of job security, and it seems to be spreading around in other industries as well, where is there sort of a need in the future to sort of return to that union-based workforce?
Yeah, the rise of the unions are on the rise, which is great. And I think there are some employers in these sectors that have traditionally been very poor employers that are seeing the light, because actually people perform better. They get better work from people who are happier. But that link doesn't seem to have filtered through in a lot of industries. I mean, if you look at the people like Timpson's, the shoe repair and key cutting business, you know, that is a family-run business that employs a lot of people who are ex-prisoners. You get a day off for your birthday. It is it's a caring business. I'm sure, everyone has their issues with their own team members. It's a normal business. But honestly, I don't really understand why more businesses aren't thinking the way you're thinking. I think the rise of the unions is a great thing, particularly among younger workers. We've seen unionisation drives in a lot of warehousing, coffee shops, all of this stuff. I think that's going to continue. And there's also a lot of pilots going on for universal basic income. And it'll be interesting to see, and they've been, I think, pretty positive. So it'll be interesting to see if Labour are elected, if anything moves the dial on that, because UBI is another really interesting initiative that could really transform work.
I think related to your question, we have a particular session on the 10th of June in the Guildhall on York being the pioneering first city to sign up to a good business charter. and looking at how businesses in the city are working together, really large businesses like Aviva, education providers like the university, but also then working with social enterprise and community associations to try to think differently about how businesses in a particular place can actually interact with each other in a much more integrated way. And it sort of backs into some of what you're talking about. I think those movements of thinking about ethical, good business that also make economic sense are really interesting.
Thank you very much for the talk so far. I just have a quick question back on the returning to work side. So my mother has just come out of retirement and is returning to work. And she's been asking me a lot of questions about what she should learn about AI, about like the current workplace. And I don't really know much because I'm still a student. So I want to direct that question to you so I can pass it on to her. Thank you.
I think when she or if she's already in the workplace, it'll be obvious what's going on because they'll be using the tech in a way that is appropriate for the team will be using the tech and she will be trained on the tech. She will learn how to do it. And the thing with AI is it's because it's constantly iterating. She will join at a certain point and then she will come along with it. She'll be swept up. And I don't think, you don't need to be worried about it because it is, it's trained on people. It talks to us as we want to be talked to. It's sort of extraordinary. So I think that, the AI in a way is almost the easiest kind of tech to get to grips with because it's so human, slightly spookily so at times. I think the main thing I would say to anyone going back into the workplace is to enjoy it and, to love being with different people that you wouldn't meet because the workplace is such a great melting pot. Generationally and in all types of diversity, you meet people you wouldn't meet in the rest of your life. So I hope she really enjoys it.
Brilliant. And just down there.
Yeah, continuing on that, I just wondered whether you have any insight, again, to do with AI and automation in its role from people applying for jobs, interviewing. I mean, do people still interview? And selection as well. So using that automation, that AI, in the actual sort of job process from application, interviewing, selection, etc.
So I'm really glad you brought this up, actually, because as some people in this room probably know, the recruitment system is really broken. It's really broken. And I hear so much despair from people who are applying for jobs, just not getting anywhere. There are so many layers of application. First 2, 3, 4 might be AI. And I think there are a lot of people who are working really hard to make it better, to help to make, if you have to submit a video interview to teach the software to recognize people who might not be shining on the video interview. People who are neurodiverse, for example, may not shine on a video. What is the answer? That I don't think they've quite cracked it yet. And also they may not be, because AI looks for keywords, they may be missing great candidates who have skills but perhaps not the education. So this shift to skills-based hiring from education-based hiring, sorry Joan, but both are important. I think the challenge for recruitment is to look for the right things from the right people, and you still need a human touch in that. So I know that at a certain level, the humans do pop up again. But it's about how do we get AI to find the right people to take to the next level. And I honestly don't think we're there. I think the recruitment system is really quite broken at the moment. And I'm really sorry for anyone who's looking for a job at the moment. It must be extraordinarily difficult.
Hello. I feel like what I'm going to say is leading on quite nicely to everything that's already been said. So I am the 26-year-old that was mentioned at the beginning. And I'm at a really difficult point in my career where I'm no longer entry-level, I'm no longer early career because I've been working long enough. But I cannot get to that next stage yet because I don't have enough experience. I haven't found my niche, which is like such a shame. I haven't found my specialism. And so it's like, I'm really curious, like, has this been recognized as like almost like an abandoned, stage of people? And if there's any insight regarding that, I'd be really curious if you've...
Yeah, the quarter-life crisis is real, and it always has been. I think we put a name to it now, and people write about it. So, there are blogs and articles about the quarter-life crisis. One thing that's interesting is that the big consultancies and professional services companies, a lot of people only work there for 2 years. And I think then they accept that to some degree. People, the people who stay will stay, but there are plenty of people who start their career here and then move off here. So the number of job hopping, the number of jobs that Gen Z are having is already higher than millennials. So it is very likely that you will have a lot of different jobs in your career. And partly that's because you know what's out there. So when Joan and I started work, the only comparisons we would have had would be what our friends were doing. But now you know what the universe is offering. And that can be overwhelming, actually. I'm not envious. But what you can do is say that I've got this experience here, and you can think of your career not like this as a line.
You talk about that in the book.
This line of a career is the line of a white man in mid-20th century America and Britain. It's not our careers. Our careers go like this, and that's okay. So think about what what it is you can do next that is going to benefit you in the long term. And the other thing I would say is that you're at work for a very long time. And I wish I had been in less of a hurry as a young person. So do you know what I mean? Take your time. Find your niche. It might find you. You don't need to, you know what I mean? You don't need to run out and seek it. Enjoy what you're doing. Get what you can get from it. And comparison is the thief of joy, as was it Roosevelt said that. Don't compare yourself to what other people are doing. It's your career and your trajectory. Is that helpful?
It's nice to know it's recognised because, it's very much horizontal right now.
Yeah.
No diagonal.
No, but it will go up and it will go down. But I think we still have this line in our heads and we can't get it. But so, banish it. It's not valid.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much.
And thank you for sharing. That's really, really kind. I've got time for one last question.
Out of some of the things that have been mentioned, some other people's questions, I've just been wondering what kind of those things might have changed around entry-level positions in around 10 years, because that's around when I might be kind of entering the workforce. And
good question. What our entry-level position is going to look like in about 10 years? I think there will be extremely automated and extremely heavy on human skills. Mm-hmm. So how well do you get on with people? Do people want to work with you? How self-aware are you about how you work? The type of worker you are, and by that I mean, are you someone who likes to work on your own in a deep, focused way? Are you someone who likes to work in an open plan office, getting inspiration from other people? I think in 10 years, it's anybody's guess, but my guess is that the focus will be very much on building teams of people with complementary skills and personalities. So you will get the skills you need at school and at university, and we don't even know what AI is going to look like in 10 years' time. So all we can do is focus on ourselves and what it is that we want from work.
But on the upside, I'll go back to the JISC report that I mentioned earlier, which looks at the labour market in the UK in 2034. And on the upside, there will be jobs. They will be in the context of AI, but we are going to need as a nation 2.5 million additional graduates in STEM and healthcare alone. Very unfortunately for the UK, the number of 18-year-olds coming through the system is going to fall off a cliff in 2030. So on the one hand, you will definitely have choices because there won't be enough of you. On the other hand, and I caveat this, I'm a Director of External Relations for the University of York. I absolutely passionately believe in the value of graduate education, but it very much highlights that need for graduate skills, that job obsolescence is going to overtake more of the instrumental jobs and the critical thinking, independent analysis skills that you very often get from humanities degrees and social sciences degrees as much as you do from STEM is going to be an absolutely valuable, really intrinsic requirement of our labour market in the 2030s onwards. So you will have choices. I'm going to finish with one last question, which you kind of know about, which is boiling all of this together and the fantastic book. And I really urge you all to go out and buy it and read it and absorb it, because it's full of really practical tips. Each chapter has this brilliant set of takeaways that you can kind of then think about, how do I translate this into my own environment? But after all of the experience of writing the book, is there one thing that you've now thought about that you think, God, I wish I'd known that at the start of my career?
Yeah, so you can't change other people. All you can do is change yourself.
Well, that feels like a very good place to end. Thank you so much for coming along to the York Festival of Ideas. This will be online as well, and we'll send out links because we're filming today. So do share it with everybody else that you know. And thank you so much, everybody, for coming, but especially thank you hugely to Isabel, who has allowed me to hijack her diary, drag her up to York on a weekend to share all of her fabulous insights and brilliant, brilliant advice. So thank you so much for being here today. Book sales are outside, and do stay around because we've got other events taking place. If you have a ticket for Kelly Holmes, there will be a queue. And we also have John Robb this evening talking about, I mean, this day started with Tudors England and is ending with goth culture tonight. I give you the York Festival of Ideas. Thank you so much.
Thank you.